What if I told you this? Most people don't actually hate their life. They just silently hate themselves inside it. Not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly. In the way they doubt every decision. In the way they apologize for existing. In the way they lower their voice, their standards, and their worth, just to be accepted by people who don't even love themselves either. We live in a world where almost everyone is searching for love, but almost no one is giving it to the one person who needs it the most themselves. You see, lack of self-love doesn't always look like depression. Sometimes it looks like overworking. Sometimes it looks like perfectionism. Sometimes it looks like staying busy, staying loud, staying fine, just to avoid being alone with the truth. And the truth is simple: you can't build a meaningful life on top of a broken relationship with yourself. You can succeed, you can impress, you can achieve, but if, at the end of the day, you still feel like you're not enough, then every win will feel empty. And every compliment will feel temporary. This audiobook is not here to tell you to love yourself more. It's here to show you why you stopped loving yourself in the first place, and how to rebuild that relationship from the inside out, not with affirmations, not with fake positivity, but with clarity, self-respect, and inner truth. Because the real question is not, do you love yourself? The real question is, do you treat yourself like someone worth loving? If the answer is no, then this is the beginning of the greatest relationship you will ever rebuild. Welcome to the journey. Let's begin. There is a quiet war happening inside millions of people every single day. A war with no battlefield, no uniforms, no explosions, just a constant, invisible clash between who we are and who we think we must become to deserve love. From the outside, it looks like a normal life. They laugh at the right moments. They perform well. They show up to work. They post happy pictures. They say, everything's fine. But when the noise disappears and they're finally alone with themselves, there's a voice that whispers the same silent verdict over and over again: you're not enough. You should be further by now. Everyone else figured it out except you. No one really loves you, they just tolerate you. And the most heartbreaking part, they believe it. Not because it's true, but because they've heard it for so long that silence feels suspicious, and kindness feels fake. This quiet war doesn't start in adulthood. It begins when we're too young to even understand what worth means. No child is born with self-doubt. A baby never looks at its reflection and thinks, my body isn't good enough. A toddler never hesitates before laughing, dancing, or asking for what they need. They don't question if they're worthy of love. They assume it. So what changed? Someone said, stop crying. You're too sensitive. Someone compared you to a sibling. Someone made love feel conditional. Someone rewarded perfection and punished emotion. Someone told you you'll be loved when, instead of you are loved now. And when that happened, something very specific broke inside you. Not your confidence, not your dreams, but your permission to feel worthy simply by existing. From that moment on, life becomes less about being yourself and more about earning the right to be accepted. That's where the war begins. It shows up differently in different people. Some people become overachievers, collecting awards, titles, and praise like armor. They don't feel proud when they win. They feel relieved. Relieved that, for a moment, they've outrun the shame of not being enough. Some become perfectionists, fixing sundown, editing, polishing themselves endlessly, because they believe one flaw can erase all their worth. Some become people pleasers, shaping themselves into whatever others want. Because being liked feels safer than being real. Some become emotionally numb, not because they don't feel, but because they feel too much, and no one ever taught them how to hold their own pain with love. Others simply shrink, talk softer, want less, exist smaller, hoping invisibility will hurt less than rejection. Nobody calls it self-hate. They call it being practical, being strong, being disciplined. But what they really mean is, I don't know how to exist without fighting myself. Here is the most important truth most people never discover. You cannot bully yourself into becoming who you want to be. You cannot shame yourself into growth. You cannot hate yourself into healing. Every time you say, I'll love myself, when you're making love conditional. The same way the world once made it conditional for you. But here's the twist. The world didn't actually win. The war didn't end. You just moved the battlefield inside your own head and continued the violence on yourself. And that is why so many people feel empty even after success. Because the applause may be real, but the love is missing. Not from the world, from themselves. Ask yourself this honestly. If you spoke to your friends the way you speak to yourself, would you still have any? If a stranger followed you around and said the same things your inner voice says to you, would you allow them to stay? If not, then why do you allow you to treat yourself that way? The war ends the moment you realize this. You don't need more achievements. You don't need more validation. You don't need more proof. You need a truce with yourself. Self-love doesn't start with a mantra. It starts with truth. Not I am perfect, but I have been unfair to myself, and I don't want to continue living this way. That sentence alone can end years of silent self-abandonment, because the opposite of self-hate is not self-love. It's self-honesty. The moment you tell the truth, the war loses power. And when the war ends, something beautiful happens. You stop seeing yourself as a problem to fix and start seeing yourself as a human to care for. That shift changes everything. If the silent war happens inside us, then the first real question is this: who started it? Who taught us to doubt ourselves, criticize ourselves, punish ourselves long before the world ever truly rejected us? The answer is uncomfortable. But it is also liberating. Self-rejection is not born in the mind. It is installed there. You were not born hating yourself. You learned it. And the mind, being the perfect student, never forgot the lesson. To understand self-love, we must first understand why the mind turns against the self. Not because we are weak, not because we enjoy pain, but because, at some point in our life, rejecting ourselves felt safer than being rejected by others. That is the psychology of self-rejection. It begins as self-protection, then slowly mutates into self-attack. 1. The mind's first rule. If I reject myself first, no one else can hurt me. When a child feels disapproved of, criticized, compared, or abandoned, their brain forms a survival strategy. Maybe I'm the problem. If I fix myself, maybe they'll love me. That child doesn't think my parents are emotionally unavailable. They think I must not be lovable enough. So what begins as self-blame soon becomes self-rejection. The brain says, if I punish myself early, maybe I won't feel the pain when others do it. And that's how the inner critic is born, not as an enemy, but as a shield. It says, I'll judge you before the world does. I'll hurt you before they can. I'll make you small so no one notices your flaws. The inner critic is not cruelty. It is fear wearing authority. 2. The identity trap. I am what others approve of. Children don't just want love. They want belonging. They want to feel, I am safe here. I matter here. So when love becomes conditional based on behavior, gratis, obedience, looks, silence, perfection, the child doesn't adapt their actions. They adapt their identity. I'm only valuable when I succeed. I'm only lovable when I'm needed. I'm only accepted when I stay small. And that becomes the subconscious rulebook of their adult life. They don't chase goals, they chase permission. They don't chase love, they chase proof. They don't want success to feel proud. They want it to feel enough. 3. The brain remembers pain more than love, neurologically. The brain is wired to store negative experiences more deeply than positive ones. Rejection, shame, humiliation, and criticism leave stronger neural imprints than praise or affection, which means you may have been loved many times. But the one time you were made to feel worthless, your brain memorized it as identity. That is why compliments feel temporary and self-doubt feels permanent. The mind doesn't protect truth. It protects pain it has already experienced. 4. The illusion of control. Self-rejection gives the brain a twisted sense of control, because if you are the problem, then at least there's something you can fix. It feels easier to believe I'm not enough than to accept I was hurt. I didn't deserve it, and I couldn't stop it. Self-blame is painful, but it feels safer than powerlessness. That is why many people would rather attack themselves than face the truth that they were neglected, unseen, or unloved in moments that shaped them. 5. The broken mirror syndrome. When you look into a cracked mirror, you don't see the mirror as broken, you see your reflection as broken. That is how childhood shapes self-worth. You didn't grow up thinking something was wrong with your parents. You grew up thinking something was wrong with you. And even when you become an adult, you carry the same mirror, just in a more sophisticated body. You no longer hear the voice that hurt you. You become it. The turning point. Self-rejection isn't self-awareness. It is internalized judgment, a wound pretending to be logic. Before you can love yourself, you must understand this. You are not fighting who you are. You are fighting who you were taught to think you are. Your self-hatred was installed, which means it can be uninstalled, but only if you stop asking, what's wrong with me, and start asking, who taught me to feel this way about myself? That is the question that breaks the spell. Every wound has a first moment, a beginning, a scene the mind never forgets. Even if the memory fades, you may not remember the exact day, the exact sentence, the exact expression on someone's face, but your nervous system does. That is the thing about early programming. You don't store it as language, you store it as truth. Before you learned math, before you learned how to spell your own name, you learned this unspoken lesson: my worth is not unconditional. No child can process that consciously. So, instead of questioning the world, the child questions themselves. Not, why wasn't I comforted, but maybe I was too emotional. Not, why wasn't I protected, but maybe I wasn't worth protecting. Not, why wasn't I seen, but maybe I wasn't interesting enough to be seen. And just like that, identity is rewritten, not by trauma itself, but by the meaning the child attaches to it. The first cut. Love is earned, not given. Children don't need perfect parents. They need emotionally available ones. But when love becomes a reward based on obedience, silence, achievement, or good behavior, the child absorbs a belief more powerful than any spoken word: I have to become someone else to be loved. That is the original wound. A split inside the child who I am not good enough, who I should be acceptable. From that moment on, life becomes a performance. Not to impress strangers, but to avoid abandonment. Emotional memory, the kind that doesn't fade. Humans don't remember everything, but we remember how things made us feel. You may not remember the details, but your body remembers what it learned. Crying is unsafe. Expressing needs equals rejection. Being too happy equals too much. Failing equals not just a mistake, but a loss of love. Being imperfect equals something to be ashamed of. So you learn to shrink, to stay quiet, to be easy, to be useful, to be praised instead of seen, to be chosen instead of known. That is what childhood conditioning really does. It doesn't destroy you. It trains you to destroy parts of yourself in order to survive. The unspoken contract. A child doesn't say, "I will stop being myself so you don't leave." But their nervous system makes the contract for them. And this is why self-love in adulthood feels so confusing. Because the version of you trying to love yourself now is fighting against the version of you that once used self-rejection to stay safe. That child still believes, if I relax, I'll be abandoned. If I stop trying, I'll be worthless. If I stop pleasing, I'll be rejected. If I show myself fully, I'll lose everything. The war you fight today didn't start today. It started the very first time love felt unstable. The cost of becoming good enough. As adults, we say we want freedom, confidence, authenticity. But deep down, there is a fear. If I stop performing, will anyone stay? So we keep the mask. We keep the perfectionism. We keep the apologizing. We keep the emotional distance. We keep the self-judgment because even pain feels safer than being unwanted again. And this is where the wound becomes a pattern. We don't choose love, we choose familiarity. We don't seek connection, we seek approval. We don't look for someone who sees us, we look for someone who validates us. The child who learned love is earned grows into an adult, addicted to validation. And that is where we go next. The core realization: before you ever judged yourself, you learned how to be judged. Before you ever abandoned yourself, you learned abandonment in someone else's silence. Self-love is not about becoming confident. It is about reparenting the version of you who never received what they needed. You are not broken. You are patterned. And patterns can be rewritten. There is a moment in every wounded child's life when love stops feeling like something they are and starts feeling like something they must earn. That moment doesn't just change how they act. It changes how they see themselves. It installs a silent rule inside the mind. If they approve of me, I matter. If they don't, I disappear. From that belief, validation becomes a drug. Not a physical one, but a psychological one. The kind that is chased through achievements, attention, compliments, relationships, applause, and the temporary relief of feeling good enough in someone else's eyes. Some people don't fall in love with people. They fall in love with being approved of, and the more validation they get, the more empty they feel afterward. Because the person being validated was never fully them to begin with. Why validation feels like oxygen. The human brain was not built for self-esteem. It was built for survival. And to the nervous system, acceptance once meant safety. Belonging meant protection. Rejection meant danger. So even as adults, the emotional brain runs an ancient program. If they don't like me, I'm not safe. And so we shape ourselves into what others will approve of. We adjust our tone. our personality, our opinions, our désir, our boundaries. We become what is acceptable, not what is true. Then we call it connection, even though it is really just performance. Connection built on performance is only a hidden form of loneliness. You may be surrounded by people, yet no one is actually with you, because no one truly knows you. The 4 modern forms of validation addiction. 1. Achievement validation, the belief, if I succeed, I am worthy. You don't chase goals. You chase permission to exist. 2. Relationship validation, the belief, if someone loves me, I am valuable. You don't want love. You want proof you are not unlovable. 3. Social validation, the belief, if people admire me, I am finally enough. You live in the spotlight, but collapse in silence. 4. Moral validation, the belief, if I am kind, helpful and selfless, I'll deserve affection. You don't have boundaries. You have emotional debt. All validation addictions share one reality: they never satisfy. They only reset the craving. Validation is not nourishment. It is sugar, sweet for a moment, destructive in the long run. The cost of being loved for the wrong reasons. When you depend on external validation, you shape yourself to fit others. You stop knowing who you truly are. You impress people. You stop feeling real. You receive approval. You lose identity. You gain attention. You still feel unseen. Being admired is not the same as being understood. Being desired is not the same as being valued. Being chosen is not the same as being known. There are people who would rather be liked by everyone than be honestly loved by someone, because being liked requires no vulnerability, but being known requires truth. And truth is terrifying when you secretly believe you are not enough. The validation test. Ask yourself, if nobody clapped, would you still do it? If nobody praised your growth, would you still grow? If nobody noticed your kindness, would you still be kind? If the answer is no, you are not living, you are auditioning. And every audition eventually becomes exhaustion. Where the addiction comes from validation is not the real problem. It only becomes a problem when it replaces self-worth. If you do not believe you are enough, every compliment becomes a drug, and every silence becomes withdrawal. People think the opposite of self-hate is self-love. It isn't. The true opposite of self-hate is self-recognition, the ability to see your own value before anyone else reflects it back. Until you can say, I don't need to be chosen to feel worthy, you will continue chasing people who never truly see you. The turning point. The question is not, why do I need validation? Every human needs validation. The real question is, why do I feel empty without it? If that wound is not healed, you will not enter relationships. You will enter emotional negotiations. You will not pursue passion, you will pursue applause. You will not love yourself. You will manage your self-esteem like a stock price, hoping it doesn't crash. You stop breaking the addiction, not by rejecting validation, but by building a self-worth that doesn't depend on it. That is where self-love changes shape from comfort to respect. Somewhere along the way, the world made self-love sound like a soft, gentle, endlessly forgiving process. A warm blanket, a cup of tea, a quiet Sunday morning, a quote that says, "You are enough, just as you are." And while there is truth in that, there is also something dangerously incomplete, because real self-love is not always soft. Sometimes self-love is steel. Sometimes It is the voice that says no more. Sometimes, it is the boundary that costs you a relationship. Sometimes, it is the discipline that feels like punishment. Sometimes, it is the silence where you finally stop negotiating your worth. True self-love is not about protecting your feelings. It is about protecting your future. You do not love a child by giving them everything they want. You love them by giving them what will make them stronger, wiser, safer, and more whole. Why should loving yourself be any different? Self-love is not the absence of discomfort. Self-love is the presence of integrity. Comfort says, do whatever feels good right now. Respect says, do whatever will still matter 5 years from now. Confort nomme pas. Respect heals it. Comfort avoids the truth. Respect demands it. Comfort is escape. Respect is evolution. The world teaches you to treat yourself kindly, but kindness without standards becomes self-sabotage. Compassion without honesty becomes self-delusion. Acceptance without responsibility becomes stagnation. If the version of you who is destroying your peace can still call what they are doing self-love, then something is wrong with the definition, not the person. You do not love yourself when you avoid the mirror. You love yourself when you are brave enough to face it. You do not love yourself only when you feel good. You love yourself when you choose what is good for you, even when it makes you uncomfortable. That is the maturity of self-love. It moves from emotion to principle, from mood to standard, from comfort to self-respect. Every person arrives at a moment in life when they realize, I cannot soften my way into a better future. To love yourself is not to constantly soothe yourself, but to refuse to abandon yourself. It is not always saying, you're fine. Sometimes it is saying, you deserve better than this, now act like it. It is not telling yourself, everything is okay. Sometimes it is finally admitting, everything is not okay, and I'm done pretending it is. Self-love is not being nice to yourself. Self-love is not betraying yourself. You betray yourself every time you tolerate disrespect just to keep someone close. You betray yourself every time you agree to what drains you, just to avoid conflict. You betray yourself every time you stay where you are shrinking, just to avoid the fear of change. Loving yourself is not about never feeling pain. It is about choosing not to stay in places that require you to abandon your worth. There is a moment, and everyone reaches it in their own way, when you realize that the people who truly love you are not the ones who never make you uncomfortable. They are the ones who never ask you to disrespect yourself to keep their love. Apply that to how you treat yourself, and watch your life change. The real sign that you love yourself is not how gently you speak to yourself on a good day, but how fiercely you protect yourself on a bad one. It is easy to say, I love myself, when nothing is being asked of you. It is harder to love yourself when self-love requires you to do the thing you've avoided for years. Let someone go, demand better treatment, stop apologizing for existing, walk away from comfort, break a destructive habit, face the truth, without excuses. Most people want the feeling of self-love without the responsibility that comes with it. But feelings do not create self-worth. Behavior does. You act your way into confidence. You act your way into dignity. You act your way into becoming someone you can finally respect. And once you respect yourself, everything else in life rearranges itself around that standard. Because when you respect yourself, you no longer beg to be chosen, you choose. You no longer chase love, you recognize it. You no longer fight to be seen, you show up as someone impossible to ignore. That is the real transformation. Self-love is not what makes you feel better. Self-love is what makes you become better. And once you understand that, the question is no longer, how can I love myself, but what am I still doing that proves I don't? When you answer that honestly, the healing begins. Here's a truth most people never hear in their entire lifetime. You were not born to learn how to love yourself. You were born already loving yourself. What you're learning now is how to return to the place where you lost that love. We don't suffer from a lack of love. We suffer from a broken relationship with the person we live with every single day, ourselves. And just like every other relationship, this one doesn't heal through theory, intentions, or positive quotes. It heals through the way you treat yourself, the way you speak to yourself, the way you show up for yourself. When your inner relationship is wounded, the outer world becomes chaotic. You chase approval. You replay old patterns. You accept less than you deserve, and no matter what you achieve, you never feel full. But when the inner relationship is restored, everything changes at the root. You stop needing to be chosen to feel worthy. You stop waiting for someone else to save you. You stop abandoning yourself in exchange for belonging. And rebuilding this relationship comes down to 4 essential pillars: self-awareness, self-acceptance, self-compassion, self-care. 4 simple words, yet each one is a doorway back to yourself. Remove any one of them, and the entire foundation collapses. 1. Self-awareness. You can't love someone you don't know. You cannot love yourself if you don't know yourself. Most people don't live their lives, they react to them. They run on autopilot, acting out old conditioning, inherited beliefs, and emotional survival patterns. They know what others want from them, but not what they want for themselves. They can list their flaws, but not their true needs. Self-awareness is not a spiritual luxury. It's the starting point of self-respect. Real self-awareness begins with simple, uncomfortable questions. What am I actually feeling right now? Do I want this? Or was I taught to want this? Where in my life am I pretending I'm okay when I'm not? If you don't see yourself clearly, you can't choose for yourself. And if you can't choose for yourself, you don't have freedom. You only have performance. Self-awareness is the moment you stop acting and start existing. 2. Self-acceptance. You don't need to earn the right to be enough. Most of us were raised on conditional love. If you behave, you're loved. If you perform, you're praised. If you impress, you're accepted. So we grow up repeating the same logic internally. I'll love myself when I'm successful. I'll accept myself when I fix everything. I'll deserve peace when I stop making mistakes. But that's not self-love. That's self-negotiation. Self-acceptance is not the end of growth. It is the beginning of it. It doesn't say, I'm perfect. It says, I am worthy of kindness even in my imperfection. You cannot love someone you're constantly trying to fix, silence, or edit. And that includes you. 3. Self-compassion. You don't need to be strong to be worthy. Self-criticism is a reflex. Self-compassion is a decision. Many people think being gentle with themselves will make them soft, unmotivated, or irresponsible. But research and real life say otherwise. People who treat themselves with compassion recover faster, learn faster, and rise faster. Because they don't turn mistakes into lifelong punishments. Self-compassion begins with one powerful question. If someone I deeply loved was going through this, what would I say to them? Then say those same words to yourself. If you don't know how to comfort yourself, you will always need someone else to do it for you. And that is the most dangerous dependency of all. 4. Self-care love is not a feeling. It is a responsibility. Self-love is not an emotion you wait to feel. It is the daily act of choosing not to abandon yourself. It looks like eating to nourish your body. Not numb your feelings, sleeping because you matter. Not because you're exhausted, saying no without guilt. And yes, without self-betrayal, protecting your peace like it is your oxygen. Self-care is not luxury. It is maintenance of your energy, your clarity, your dignity. A lot of people say, I love myself, but their habits say, I'll take care of myself later. That isn't love. That is emotional neglect, self-inflicted. Real self-care is not indulgence. It is disciplined respect for your own well-being. You don't need higher self-esteem. You need to stop treating yourself like an afterthought. Self-awareness lets you see yourself. Self-acceptance lets you stay with yourself. Self-compassion lets you heal yourself. Self-care lets you protect yourself. Self-love is not one big breakthrough. It's the sum of 1,000 small choices that say, I am worth showing up for. And when the relationship within is healed, you stop begging for validation. You stop performing for acceptance. You stop trading pieces of yourself to feel loved. Because you finally understand you are not here to prove your worth. You are here to live from it. There is a voice inside every human being that knows how to wound us with perfect precision. It does not scream. It does not argue. It whispers, and the whisper is sharp enough to cut through confidence, momentum, and self-worth in a single sentence. You're not good enough. Someone else would have done this better. You're already behind. Who do you think you are to want this? That voice has many tones, sometimes cold and analytical, sometimes sarcastic and mocking, sometimes disguised as high standards or motivation. But the result is always the same. You move forward, but never feel like you're allowed to arrive. Most people make the same mistake when dealing with their inner critic. They either give in to it completely or try to kill it entirely. Both approaches fail, because the inner critic is not your enemy. It is a misdirected protector, a part of you that still believes fear is the only way to keep you safe. Disciplined or worthy. The real power is not in silencing it forever, but in learning to hear it without obeying it. When you master that, you unlock a rare balance, clarity without cruelty, standards without self-destruction, ambition without self-hate. Where the inner critic came from. The critic is not born in adulthood. It is inherited, absorbed, and coded into your nervous system long before you knew the word self-esteem. It comes from a parent who thought strictness equals shaping character, a teacher who thought humiliation equals motivation, a society that believed shame equals discipline, a culture that glorified perfection and punished humanity, a moment where you failed once and decided it defined you forever. Before the inner critic was your voice, it was someone else's tone, and you repeated it, not because it was loving, but because it was familiar. That is why silencing the critic feels scary. It is not just losing a voice, it is losing a survival pattern. The lie the inner critic tells. The critic doesn't say, I want to destroy you. It says, if I stop attacking you, you will become lazy, stupid, unlovable, or irrelevant. It sells fear as responsibility. It sells shame as self-improvement. It sells emotional violence as standards. And many high achievers believe it. They think the inner critic is the source of their success, when in reality, it is the source of their fragile success. Because when achievement is built on self-attack, you don't feel proud when you win. You only feel relieved. You didn't fail. You don't celebrate progress. You only punish yourself for not being further ahead. That is not ambition. That is self-rejection, wearing a productivity disguise. The shift from inner critic to inner coach. You don't silence the critic by force. You upgrade its function. The critic says, "You're not good enough." The coach says, "You can get better, and I'll help you." The critic says, "You failed." "What's wrong with you?" The coach says, "You failed." "What can we learn?" The critic says, "Everyone else is doing more." The coach says, "Let's focus on your lane." The critic attacks identity. The coach strengthens ability. The critic is fueled by fear. The coach is fueled by clarity. Rewriting that voice is not positive thinking. It is emotional leadership. How to disarm the critic in real time. When the critic speaks, don't fight. Pause it. Name it. Question it. 1. Pause. The reaction. I hear the voice. I'm not merging with it. 2. Label it. That's the old critic. Not truth conditioning. 3. Ask for evidence. What facts support this? What facts contradict it? 4. Redirect it. If this voice were actually trying to help, what would it say differently? You're not trying to shut the voice up. You are forcing it to evolve. Every time you do this, the critic loses power, because the critic only survives in unconsciousness. The moment you listen consciously, it shrinks. The fear of losing ambition. Many people cling to their inner critic because they fear the alternative. If I stop being hard on myself, I'll stop trying. If I stop judging myself, I'll get complacent. If I stop stressing, I'll stop succeeding. That is the biggest lie the critic ever sold. Because the most successful, peaceful, grounded people on earth are not driven by fear of failure. They are driven by respect for their potential. The critic says, "Run, or you'll be nothing." Self-worth says, "Run, because you were made for more." Success built on fear burns you out. Success built on self-respect builds you up. You don't lose ambition when you silence the critic. You lose anxiety disguised as ambition. And what remains is real drive, the kind that isn't fueled by self-hate, but by self-belief. The day you become free, you will know the critic is no longer in control. When you can make a mistake without collapsing. You can rest without guilt. You can receive compliments without suspicion. You can start again without shame. You can grow because you want to, not because you feel worthless without growth. That is what freedom sounds like. The fear is still there, but it no longer owns the microphone. You become the one who decides what your life means, not a voice you never chose. Repeating a script you never wrote. And once the inner critic becomes a coach instead of a judge, you no longer rise out of tension, you rise out of truth. Loving yourself is not the danger. Misunderstanding self-love is. So many people hesitate to begin healing because they are afraid of what it might turn them into. They fear that if they stop overgiving, if they stop apologizing for existing, if they finally put their own needs on the table, they will become selfish, arrogant, disconnected, or self-centered. They fear becoming the very type of person who once hurt them, the entitled, the demanding, the cold, and that fear is understandable, because the world has confused self-love with self-absorption for so long that most people don't know the difference anymore. But the truth is simple. Self-love is not the beginning of narcissism. It is the end of self-neglect. Narcissism and self-love come from opposite emotional realities. A narcissist does not love themselves too much. They don't love themselves at all. What looks like inflated ego is usually just unhealed emptiness covered in performance, superiority, or control. Narcissism says I must take from others to feel whole. Self-love says I already am whole, so I don't need to take anything from anyone. Narcissism is hunger disguised as confidence. Self-love is confidence without hunger. One drains. One overflows. One demands. One respects. One seeks admiration. One doesn't need it. So if your fear is, what if I become selfish? You can let it go. Truly, selfish people never stop to ask that question. The moment you're worried about being selfish is the moment you prove you are capable of compassion. People pleasers are the ones who fear self-love the most, not because they don't want it, but because they were raised to believe that choosing themselves hurts others. They learned that silence keeps peace, that sacrifice earns love, that saying yes makes them good, and saying no makes them difficult. So when they begin to set boundaries, they don't feel powerful, they feel guilty. When they rest, they don't feel restored, they feel irresponsible. When they stop overgiving, they don't feel balanced, they feel selfish. But here is the truth. Most people don't know. People pleasers are not kind because they are full of love. They are kind because they are afraid of consequences. They do not give from abundance. They give from survival. Real love flows from authenticity, not obedience. Real care comes from freedom, not fear. Self-love doesn't make you stop caring about others. It stops you from caring in ways that require you to abandon yourself. Selfishness is not putting yourself first. Selfishness is demanding or expecting someone else to pay the price for your comfort. Self-love is not me instead of you. Self-love is me too. It does not remove empathy. It removes imbalance. A person who truly loves themselves becomes easier, not harder, to be around because they don't treat others as emotional bandages, fuel tanks, validation machines, or rescue teams. They don't drain the room. They don't collapse when someone says no. They don't punish people for not meeting needs. They refuse to meet within themselves. Self-love creates emotional adulthood. The opposite of selfishness is not self-sacrifice. The opposite of selfishness is self-responsibility. When you are responsible for your own needs, your own well-being, your own self-worth, you don't have to extract anything from anyone. You don't have to manipulate, impress, or control. You don't have to turn love into a performance. That is why the world becomes safer around people who know how to love themselves, because they stop needing anyone else to carry the weight of their unlived life. Many people confuse self-prioritization with selfishness. But if taking care of yourself destroys a relationship, it was never a relationship, it was a transaction. Love that depends on your self-abandonment is not love. It is dependency wearing affection as a disguise. Healthy love exists between two people who already have a relationship with themselves. Unhealthy love exists between two people who are trying to use each other to fill a void. The more you love yourself, the more clearly you can love others without losing your center, your dignity, or your identity in the process. Self-love doesn't shrink connection. It protects it from distortion. Because when love is not rooted in need, it becomes a choice, and every choice you freely make is deeper than anything you ever gave out of fear. So no, you do not become narcissistic when you love yourself. You become emotionally honest. You become responsible for your energy. You become someone who gives without resentment and receives without guilt. You become someone who can walk away without hatred and stay without self-betrayal. You begin to understand that love is not measured by how much you sacrifice, but by how much of yourself you are able to keep while giving. And the world does not suffer because people love themselves too much. The world suffers because people don't, and so they spend their lives extracting worth from everyone around them. Self-love is not the enemy. Self-ignorance is. Self-abandonment is. Self-betrayal is. When you stop abandoning yourself, you stop resenting the people who don't save you. When you stop punishing yourself, you stop punishing others through silence, guilt, and expectation. When you stop starving for love, you stop taking love hostage. Self-love does not turn you into someone who takes more. It turns you into someone who finally stops taking what was never truly yours to carry. Self-love is not just an internal feeling. It is a force that quietly rewires the way you move through the world. It changes what you chase, what you accept, what you tolerate, what you attract, and what you become. And the proof of self-love is never just in how you talk to yourself. It is in how your life begins to reshape itself around the person you finally allow yourself to be. A person who does not love themselves is constantly trying to earn a place in life. A person who does love themselves begins to belong in their own life. That single difference affects everything: how you work, how you love, how you show up, because inner peace never stays inside. It becomes visible. It becomes energy. It becomes identity. Self-love reshapes three of the biggest arenas of life success: relationships and presence. Let's look at each one not as concepts, but as transformations you can feel. How self-love changes success. There are two kinds of success in the world. One is built on fear, pressure, comparison, and the need to prove you are not a failure. The other is built on alignment, clarity, and the deep knowing that you already have worth. So anything you build is an expression of purpose, not a search for identity. Without self-love, work becomes self-punishment. You chase achievements not because they fulfill you, but because you don't feel enough without them. You say yes to everything, even when it burns you out. You measure your value by productivity, outcome, and applause. And when the applause fades, so does your sense of self. You don't create, you perform. You don't grow, you grind. You don't live, you hustle for permission to feel valid. But when self-love enters the picture, ambition doesn't disappear. It evolves. You stop working against yourself and begin working for yourself. You stop needing success to fill a void and start creating from a place of inner abundance. You stop asking, "What will they think of me?" and start asking, "Does this feel true to me?" Self-love does not make you less driven. It makes you driven by something deeper than fear. You no longer chase status. You choose impact. You no longer seek to impress. You seek to express. You no longer build a life that looks successful. You build a life that feels like yours. Success becomes a natural extension of clarity, not a mask for insecurity. How self-love changes relationships. Most people don't suffer from a lack of love. They suffer from a lack of self-worth inside their love. Without self-love, relationships feel like emotional gambling. You give more than you should because you're afraid to lose. You silence yourself because you're afraid to be abandoned. You settle for less because you don't believe you're allowed to want more. You call it love, but it's really fear wearing loyalty as a disguise. You stay, not because it's right, but because you're terrified of being alone with yourself. You overextend, not because you're generous, but because rejection feels like death to the part of you that never learned to feel worthy by simply existing. But when you love yourself, the entire equation changes. You no longer confuse attachment with connection. You no longer accept pain and call it patience. You no longer mistake emotional starvation for devotion. Self-love makes you harder to manipulate, not harder to love, because when you know your worth, you stop begging to be chosen. You stop negotiating your value. You stop shrinking your voice to protect someone else's comfort. Love becomes something you share, not something you chase. You don't stay because you're afraid to lose someone. You stay because both of you are growing in the same direction. You don't love to feel needed, you love to feel known. And the greatest gift, you stop needing someone to complete you. So you're finally able to meet someone as an equal, not a half. How self-love changes presence. Presence is the silent language of a person who is no longer at war with themselves. When you don't love yourself, every room feels like a mirror. Do I look okay? Am I enough here? What do they think of me? You are physically present, but mentally performing. Your body is in the room, but your identity is in the hands of strangers. But when you love yourself, the performance ends. You don't walk into rooms hoping to be accepted, you bring acceptance with you. You don't compete for attention. You radiate quiet certainty. You don't force confidence, you embody it. Self-love gives you something most people don't even realize they've lost: belonging to yourself. You stop needing to be impressive. You begin to be real. And being real is what makes you magnetic. People trust those who don't need the room to validate them. People relax around those who are not trying to control perception. People feel safe around those who are not hiding behind performance. That kind of presence cannot be faked. It is earned through inner alignment, the moment you stop running away from yourself. The truth that connects all three: self-love doesn't make life perfect. It makes life yours. It doesn't eliminate challenge. It eliminates self-sabotage. It doesn't erase fear. It erases the belief that fear means you're unworthy. It doesn't guarantee success, love, or admiration, but it guarantees that whatever comes, you will not abandon yourself again. That is the real miracle of self-love, not what it adds to your life, but what it removes: the need to prove, to chase, to perform, to be chosen. Because once you finally choose yourself, the world no longer feels like a judge's table. It becomes a place where you simply live. There comes a point in every inner journey where self-love is no longer just an idea, a practice, or a healing process. It becomes an identity. You stop trying to love yourself, and you start being someone who is naturally lovable in your own eyes. This is the final evolution of self-love, not just liking who you are, but respecting who you are. Respect is what transforms self-love from emotional softness into unshakable strength. Because here is the truth: very few people realize you don't build self-respect from affirmations. You build it from alignment, when your actions finally match your standards. Self-respect is the moment you stop negotiating your worth. You no longer say yes to things that drain you. You no longer shrink yourself to be accepted. You no longer abandon your needs to be loved. You become someone you admire, not because you are perfect, but because your choices are finally rooted in truth, not fear. And the more you respect yourself, the quieter the world becomes. Opinions lose their power. Rejection no longer defines you. Praise no longer hypnotizes you, because validation becomes optional, but integrity becomes essential. The shift from healing to becoming in the early chapters of this journey. Self-love was about understanding the wound, breaking patterns, healing the past, softening the inner critic, and learning to treat yourself with compassion But this chapter isn't about healing anymore. It's about becoming. Self-love starts soft, but it must end strong. It begins with comfort, but it ends with character. The people you respect most in life are not the ones who were never insecure, never afraid, never hurt. They are the ones who refused to stay there. They acted in spite of fear. They walked away from what no longer served them. They chose growth over comfort, truth over approval, and alignment over convenience. Self-respect is the graduation stage of self-love. The 3 pillars of becoming unshakable. 1. You keep the promises you make to yourself, not the big ones. The small, daily ones. If you say you'll wake up early, you do. If you say you'll rest when tired, you do. If you say you'll stop replying to people who drain you, you do. Every time you keep a promise, your brain learns, my word means something. That is the root of unshakable confidence. 2. You choose alignment over approval. Most people know what they want. They just abandon it the moment someone disapproves. Respecting yourself means this: I will not betray myself just to be liked. Approval feels good, but alignment feels right. And loving yourself always requires choosing right over easy. 3. You let your standards shape your life. Self-respect is not about arrogance. It is about having standards and actually enforcing them. You don't need to argue. You don't need to justify. You don't need to explain why you deserve better. A person with standards speaks loudly just by walking away, becoming the version of you that you would look up to if you were a child watching your adult self today. Would you feel inspired or disappointed? Real self-love is when the answer becomes, yes, I am someone I'm proud to grow into. Because the real goal is not just loving yourself in the mirror, it's living a life that earns your respect. That means you don't ghost your dreams anymore. You don't shrink yourself in conversations anymore. You don't apologize for existing anymore. You don't stay where love is conditional anymore. You don't pretend to be okay when something is breaking you anymore. Growth is no longer dramatic, it's intentional. Boundaries are no longer battles, they're simply clarity. Confidence is no longer a performance, it's a byproduct of self-trust. The quiet power of being unshakable. When you truly become someone you respect, life changes in ways most people never experience. You stop chasing. You start choosing. You stop proving. You start embodying. You stop surviving. You start living. You don't need people to praise you. They just naturally do. Not because you try to impress them, but because self-respect is magnetic. People follow those who are rooted. They trust those who don't need to be liked. They admire those who are not for sale. That is the energy of someone who is whole. The final transformation, self-love, is no longer just healing the inner child. It is now maturing the inner adult. You love yourself, not because you're flawless, but because you finally stopped abandoning yourself. You no longer ask, do they like me? You ask, do I like who I am around them? You no longer ask, what if I fail? You ask, what if I betray myself by not trying? Your greatest fear is no longer rejection. Your greatest fear is losing your own respect. That is the ultimate freedom. Your new identity statement. Not an affirmation. Not a mantra. A declaration: I am no longer available for anything that costs me my peace, me dignity, or my self-respect. Say it. Write it. Live it. Because the most powerful thing you can become is someone you trust. Someone you respect. Someone you refuse to abandon. That is the unshakable self. And once you become that version of you, life stops being something you survive and starts becoming something you own. If you take nothing else from this audiobook, Let it be this: you were never broken. You were never unworthy. You were simply unprotected by yourself. All those years you didn't feel loved. It wasn't because others failed you. It was because you learned to leave yourself first. You abandoned your needs to be accepted. You silenced your voice to avoid disapproval. You betrayed your truth to keep the peace. You settled for crumbs and called it love. You tolerated disrespect because you didn't believe you deserved more. Self-love was never the problem. Self-abandonment was, because deep down, you already know how to love. You love your friends. You love your family. You love partners. Even when they fail you, you love people who don't always deserve it. You were never incapable of love. You just never allowed yourself to be the one who receives it. And now, the shift begins. Self-love is no longer a feeling you chase. It is a standard you refuse to fall below. No more shrinking to fit into places that don't value you. No more apologizing for your needs, dreams, or boundaries. No more waiting for permission to live a life that feels true. You are done begging for the love you were meant to give yourself. A truth most people never realize. The world does not reward the most talented. It rewards the most self-respecting. The person who believes in themselves will always outperform the person who doubts themselves. The person who refuses to be disrespected will always live a freer life than the one who seeks approval. The person who protects their peace will always be richer than the one who chases validation. Self-love is not something you achieve. It is something you practice every time you refuse to abandon yourself again. The real work begins after this audio ends. The question is no longer, do I love myself? The question now is, what would someone who loves themselves do in this moment when you're tired? When you're rejected? When you're afraid? When you're tempted to go back to what hurt you? When someone tries to make you feel small? When you feel unworthy of something good? Every moment is a decision, self-abandonment or self-alignment. Love without action is a fantasy. Respect without boundaries is a lie. Growth without discomfort is impossible. You are not here to be perfect. You are here to be whole. Your final promise to yourself. Say this. Not as an affirmation, but as a vow. I will no longer leave myself last. I will not shrink to be loved. I will not negotiate my worth. I will not return to places I had to heal from. I will not abandon myself, not again. Not ever. That is the real ending of the book, and the real beginning of your life. Do one thing today that proves you are done abandoning yourself. Block the person who drains you. Say no without explaining. Treat your body with dignity. Speak the truth you've been swallowing. Walk away from the table where your soul is starving. Take the first step toward the life you know you're meant for. Not tomorrow. Not when you feel ready. Not when they finally approve. Today. Now. Because self-respect lives in action. This audiobook is not meant to inspire you. It is meant to activate you. If you finish listening and go back to who you were, nothing changes. But if you walk away with a new standard, a standard where you never abandon yourself again, your entire life will change in ways most people never experience. That is my hope for you. That is my challenge for you. That is your responsibility to you. Your story does not end with self-love. It begins with self-loyalty. And from this moment on, you do not leave yourself behind.